The Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation will come to order. The committee is meeting today to receive testimony on the fiscal year 2020 budget request for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Science and Technology Directorate. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today to discuss an important priority for this committee: funding the cybersecurity, infrastructure security, and innovation missions at the Department of Homeland Security. But before we begin, I would like to send my condolences to the victims and families of the recent synagogue shooting in California. We're keeping Poway community in our thoughts and prayers this week. But thoughts and prayers aren't enough. We also need to demand more of the president and his administration in the face of the rising threat of white nationalism and anti-Semitism seriously. Returning to the topic of today's hearing, I want to begin by thanking the full committee ranking member Rogers and subcommittee ranking member Katko for joining committee Democrats in writing to appropriators to seek additional funding for CISA's cybersecurity mission. I ask unanimous consent to insert a copy of the letter into the record. Hearing no objection, the letter is inserted. From election security to supply chain security, we ask more of DHS's cybersecurity arm every year. Despite CISA's growing mission, its budget has remained stagnant. Since taking office, the president and those around him have paid a lot of lip service to the issues related to cybersecurity and innovation, but there hasn't been much follow-through. In February, for example, the president touted his innovation agenda, but his fiscal year 2020 budget slashes funding for the S&T by nearly 1/3. In September, former Secretary Nielsen stated that cyber attacks now exceed the risk of fiscal attacks. Yet, the president's FY 2020 budget would cut CISA's cybersecurity funding. Last fall, the White House released the National Cyber Strategy, which, among other things, promised to further enable the Department of Homeland Security to secure federal department and agency networks. But the fiscal year 2020 budget failed to request additional funds or additional authorities for CISA's federal network security mission. And although officials throughout the administration have declared that election security is a priority, no one in the White House has been directed to coordinate a federal response, and it has never been a budget priority. Instead, this national security issue seems to be viewed as a hot potato in the president's inner circle, not worthy of a whole-of-government approach. To complicate matters, all of this is happening in the absence of a White House cybersecurity coordinator, which the White House eliminated last year. The Mueller report makes clear that our adversaries will continue to meddle in our elections. And DHS and the FBI have issued numerous warnings about threats Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, among others, pose to our critical infrastructure. The threats we face are constantly evolving. Our cybersecurity capabilities and the technology we deploy must do the same. In short, the time has come for less talk and more action. If the White House won't lead, then Congress will. I am hopeful that our bipartisan efforts to secure the additional funding for CISA's cybersecurity activities will be successful. And I urge appropriators to reject the drastic cuts proposed to S&T's budget. As the chairman of this subcommittee, I take my oversight responsibility of CISA and S&T seriously. That said, it's hard to do effective oversight when Congress has given an agency a mission that the president's budget doesn't fully support. In the meantime, I look forward to understanding how this committee can help CISA clarify its cybersecurity responsibilities among its interagency partners, particularly in the absence of a permanent secretary. Now that CISA has publicly released the National Critical Functions List, I will be interested in understanding how it will coordinate across sectors and the interagency to develop the risk register. And I'll be interested to know how we can support S&T's efforts to equip DHS's components and first responders across the country with the technology they need to do their jobs better and safer. I look forward to the conversation we will have today, and I yield back the balance of my time. Members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. We now have Mr. Katko read his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our distinguished witnesses for being here today, Mr. Krebs and Mr. Pryan. So also thank you, the chair of the whole committee, Mr. Thompson, for being here as well. Our nation faces digital and physical threats daily, hourly, by the minute, by the second, really, that have the potential to disrupt, damage, and destroy their targets. These threats will only grow in magnitude, frequency, and sophistication in the years ahead. We've had several major attacks in my district alone in the last few weeks, and they're going to continue, obviously. The federal government must work with partners across the public and private sectors, not only to prevent and deter current threats, but also to evolve to meet those of the future. Congress recognized this need and last year passed the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act of 2018. This act created the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA for short, to serve as the nation's risk advisor, providing for the timely sharing of information, analysis, and assessment, and facilitating mitigation and resilience, building to partners across government and industries. Their motto is to defend today and secure tomorrow, and their mission is expansive. CISA is responsible for securing the civilian federal networks, comprised of 99 civilian agencies, monitoring emerging threats across sectors 24/7, 365, securing our nation's chemical facilities, partnering with public and private sector to protect soft targets and crowded places, and identifying and addressing risks to our national critical functions. It is crucial that CISA has the budget and the human capital necessary to be successful. Today, we will take a closer look at their plans and how they intend to carry out and achieve their mission. I'm also interested in hearing from National Critical Functions List and the new binding operational directive released today. Today, we also hear from the Science and Technology Directorate, or S&T, about how they plan to execute their mission in the year ahead. S&T, through partnerships within the federal government, academia, and industry, develops innovative solutions to aid the Department of Homeland Security in achieving its mission more effectively, efficiently, and affordably. And like my colleague, the chair of this committee said, Mr. Richmond, there's bipartisan support to increasing your budgets. We understand the critical function you play, and we understand that you need more money to be able to do it properly. And I fully support that notion. I look forward to hearing from both of our witnesses and my colleagues to see how we can work together to ensure that Homeland Security is capable of protecting our nation from digital and physical threats. And before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask that we add Congressman Rogers' written testimony to the record since he was unable to be here.
Without objection.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize the chairman of the full Committee on Homeland Security, Mr. Benny Thompson from Mississippi, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank our witnesses for their presence today. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to examine an issue critical to our national security posture, the budget request for the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and the Science and Technology Directorate. The past month at the Department of Homeland Security has been a tumultuous one. The President dismissed the Secretary, the Undersecretary for Management, the Director of the Secret Service, and the Acting Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. At the same time, the Mueller report, even in its redacted form, crystallizes the threats of foreign election interference as the 2020 elections approach. Over the weekend, one person died and 3 were injured during a Passover services at a California synagogue. 6 months to the day of the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting that killed 11, underscoring the growing threat of domestic terrorism at the hands of emboldened white nationalists. As we are a month away from hurricane season and there is no Senate-confirmed FEMA administrator. In short, the nation is facing increasingly complex threats and requires steady leadership to confront them. That is why I'm pleased that Director Krebs and Acting Undersecretary Bryan are here to talk about the budgets for components charged with leading civilian cyber security efforts, protecting critical infrastructure, and developing technologies that make us safer and more secure. For the record, I have serious concerns regarding the President's FY 2020 budget request for both CISA and S&T. Last September, the former DHS Secretary observed that cyber attacks now exceed the risk of physical attacks. Since the President submitted his last budget request, the FBI and DHS issued a joint technical alert warning about Russian cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Ransomware attacks have already wreaked havoc on local governments from Atlanta to Albany, and the federal government announced that the Chinese government engaged in a 12-year cyber espionage campaign targeting intellectual property and trade secrets. The list is far from complete, and after each incident, we've looked at CISA to help us understand and mitigate the consequences and secure the ecosystem from future attacks. Moving forward, we look to CISA to continue its work improving the cybersecurity posture of 99 federal agencies, ensure a secure 5G rollout, and help state and local governments keep bad actors out of our election systems. Yet the President's budget would decrease funding for CISA's cybersecurity budget from FY 2019 levels. In the context of the current threat environment, even level funding is as dangerous as a cut. I commend CISA's leadership for proactively tackling many of these threats head-on, including by making its cybersecurity capabilities available to presidential campaigns. The Mueller report provided far greater details on the scale and scope of Russian election interference efforts, particularly how the Russians manipulated hacked information from campaigns to sow deeds of discord and sway votes. I'm glad that CISA is willing to do its part to prevent all forms of election interference. But I'm worried that we are writing checks in this FY 2020 budget that we can't cash, especially given its important responsibilities to other critical infrastructure sectors. Toward that end, I will be interested to know the level of engagement CISA will be able to undertake under the budget request and how it will grow its support if Congress provided additional funding. I'd also like to raise concern about funding level requested for S&T. For too long, we've deferred investment in innovative security technologies to fund operation and funding the President's southern border wall. But these cuts have consequences. From reducing first responder training and technology testing opportunities, by closing National Urban Security Technology Laboratory to shrinking Homeland Security researcher communities by cutting university programs and centers of excellence. The program FY 2020 budget shortchanges the future for political wins today. I'll fight to restore funding to improve innovation activities at S&T. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank the witnesses again for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will now welcome our panel of witnesses. First, I'd like to welcome Chris Krebs, the Director of the DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Back to testify before this panel. Director Krebs has been at the helm of the DHS's cybersecurity activities since 2017, and he has been an integral player in shaping and developing the department's election security capabilities. I'd also like to welcome William Bryan, the senior official performing the duties of the Undersecretary, who has been leading the Science and Technology Directorate since May 2017. Prior to his service at DHS, Mr. Bryan held multiple leadership roles at the Department of Energy and Department of Defense. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted into the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Director Krebs.
Chairman Richmond, Ranking Member Katko, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for today's opportunity to testify regarding the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA's, 2020 budget request. CISA leads the national effort to safeguard and secure federal networks and critical infrastructure from cyber and physical threats. In this sense, we serve as the nation's risk advisor. To further our efforts in this mission, it is critical that across government and industry we have clarity and a common sense of purpose on what it is we need to protect. Earlier today, I announced that we reached a new milestone within CISA by identifying a set of national critical functions. The NCFs are functions of government and the private sector so vital to the United States that their disruption, corruption, or dysfunction would have a debilitating effect on security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination thereof. NCFs represent an evolution in the nation's risk management efforts by focusing on how entities or organizations enable functions or services across the economy, allowing for a better understanding of cross-cutting risk factors and the increasingly interdependent nature of connected infrastructure. The National Critical Functions effort is just one example of how CISA is leading the nation's risk management efforts and will serve as a roadmap to guide CISA activities in the coming years. Today, I'd like to briefly touch on 5 of those activities: protection of federal networks, election security, operational technology, supply chain risk management, and soft target security. Across the federal government, we have better IT capabilities government-wide. We are on a path to standardization, and leadership awareness at the cabinet level is increasing. By issuing guidance or directives to federal agencies, providing tools and services, and implementing cybersecurity initiatives, we are protecting government and critical infrastructure networks from malicious actors. Binding operational directives have yielded significant results for federal cybersecurity. For instance, we have reduced the time agencies were taking to patch critical vulnerabilities from an average of 219 days in 2015 to an average of around 20 days today. In many cases, that is better than industry, but we can do better. Yesterday, I issued an updated directive requiring even shorter mitigation timeframes for a broader category of vulnerabilities. In January, we also issued an emergency directive to protect federal networks from a global campaign tampering with the Internet's phone book, known as DNS. This year's budget will develop efforts to centralize DNS resolution for the federal government. Perhaps the highest profile threat today is attempts by nation-state actors to interfere in our elections. Over the last 2 years, we have become close partners with the election community. Our efforts to protect 2020 are already underway. We'll focus on broadening the reach and depth of our assistance, emphasizing the criticality of election auditability, prioritizing the need to patch vulnerabilities, and developing locality-specific cybersecurity profiles. Operational technologies, such as industrial control systems, are those components that operate our critical infrastructure. The increasing integration and connectivity of these technologies has vastly increased the potential impact of cyber threats. Included in this year's budget is a request for a voluntary pilot that will deploy network sensors to detect malicious activity on critical infrastructure networks, including industrial control systems. Next, supply chain security is also critical to managing risk. CISA chairs DHS's seat on the Federal Acquisition Security Council. This council, established by law last December, will provide a coordinated approach across the federal government to supply chain security. Our success depends on collaboration with industry experts, though. CISA's Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force has brought together 20 federal agencies and 40 of the largest companies in the information, technology, and communications sectors to reach consensus on how to best manage risk. CISA also remains focused on physical threats. On Saturday, we were once again deeply saddened to learn of the tragic shooting at a synagogue in Poway, California. Far too often, our nation is confronted with another violent attack on places such as entertainment venues and places of worship or schools. Earlier this month, CISA updated and released a resource guide on securing such soft targets in crowded places. Before closing, research and development is critical to CISA's mission. CISA and S&T are committed to effective coordination on R&D. We are working together on R&D for cyber data analytics, and we will make R&D investments in mobile security to include emerging 5G security requirements. We are also looking at innovative approaches to securing soft targets in crowded places from attacks. In closing, I would like to thank the committee for its continued support of CISA and our mission. The authorities and resources provided over the years have helped raise the baseline of cybersecurity and mitigated countless threats to federal networks and critical infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Bryan to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Richmond, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify on the President's budget request for fiscal year 2020, which includes a request of $582.1 million for the Science and Technology Directorate within the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The Department's research and development activities support a broad range of DHS missions, including domain threat awareness, delivering mitigation strategies, and creating novel technology and approaches for components, first responders, and other partners across the Homeland Security enterprise. Our customers put their lives on the line every day to keep our nation safe, and having the correct tools, techniques, and/or technologies can be vital to the operator's safety and success. We must enable efficient, effective, and secure operations across all Homeland Security missions by applying timely scientific, engineering, and innovative solutions through research, design, test and evaluation, and acquisition support. Therefore, it is my mandate to ensure an efficient, effective, and nimble organization is in place to address the R&D needs of the department and our partners. Whether through the identification of existing technologies or the timely development of new technology, S&T can provide them with the tools they need to safely and effectively protect the homeland and the American people. On October 1st, 2018, I revitalized our structures, processes, and procedures, setting the foundation for S&T to be more agile and responsive, ready to move quickly in response of changes in the threat environment, and to make use of existing technologies that can be adapted and leveraged to expedite the development of vital capabilities. The revitalization strengthens our relationships to DHS components, first responders, and our customers, and results in a more integrated approach to innovation, requirements gathering, and problem solving. I have realigned current R&D projects and funding to support the department's key priorities going forward. For example, the opioid detection project to support CBP, the Next Generation Explosives Trace Detection Program to support TSA, and our abilities to support counter unmanned aircraft systems efforts across the department. Another key priority is cybersecurity. The 2018 DHS cybersecurity strategy emphasizes the importance of robust, cross-departmental cybersecurity R&D. The FY 2020 budget request proposes that most of DHS's cyber research and development resources are included in CISA's request. Over the last 8 months, CISA and S&T have collaborated on a plan for execution of the FY 19 funding, in addition to the future year portfolio planning for 2020 and beyond. Our teams jointly have identified, prioritized, and validated research and development priorities for the S&T work program, each of which can be mapped to a departmental cybersecurity priority. It should be noted that CISA is not our only customer for cybersecurity R&D, since many of our activities with other components have a cyber nexus that must be addressed. The FY 2020 request continues to support S&T's Silicon Valley Innovation Program, or SVIP, which leverages innovative commercial capabilities from across the country through non-traditional government contractors to rapidly deliver technology that meets validated component requirements. To date, over 400 small businesses have applied to participate in SVIP solicitations. S&T has worked with 35 small startup companies and leveraged over $400 million in private sector investment that aligns ongoing private sector activity with DHS operational component requirements. The budget will allow S&T to continue our commitment to first responder and disaster resilience R&D with an additional $10.9 million to fund programs requested by FEMA that will increase resiliency, preparedness, and risk mitigation in support of FEMA's strategic plan. The budget request also includes $7.1 million to continue funding the Chemical Security Analysis Center, or the CSAC. The CSAC identifies and assesses chemical threats and vulnerabilities in the United States and develops the best responses to potential chemical hazards. CSAC has been instrumental in supporting the nation with research and development for the rapid detection of synthetic opioids. S&T's mission is to deliver effective and innovative insights, methods, and solutions for the critical needs of DHS components and our operational partners. Through our revitalization efforts and within the available resources provided by the 2020 budget, S&T plans to continue to build upon that mission. Chairman Richmond, Ranking Member Katko, and the members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of S&T. I look forward to answering your questions.
I want to thank both witnesses for your testimony. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. And this is not a trick question. I just really would appreciate a yes or no as best of your ability. Our intelligence agencies and the Mueller report both confirm Russian election interference. Do you have any reason to dispute those assertions from our intelligence community and the Mueller report?
No, sir.
Do you agree that election interference is a real and dangerous threat that must be addressed?
Yes, sir, I do.
With that, let me ask you some other questions that are not yes or no. Who at the White House is leading the whole of government election security effort?
So presently, we work closely with the NSC on election security-related policy issues. We have clear guidance from Ambassador Bolton and the National Security Council on what it is they expect of us to do. When it comes down to actual execution of election security efforts across the interagency, we also have very clear understanding of our lanes in the road between the intelligence community, the FBI, the law enforcement community, and my team at DHS CISA. The intelligence community works to find out what the bad guys are doing. The FBI works to help take them off the table, arrest or whatever. And then my team works with state and local election officials to provide them an understanding of the threat landscape and provide them the tools, capabilities, training, exercise, what other capacity building capabilities in support of their efforts.
And I know that you would be interested in information sharing. The FBI is focused on collecting evidence and building a case. I guess I'm a sports guy, so I do sports analogies. And I understand that everybody has their different routes to run and their different assignments. Somebody's going to block, somebody's going to do that. Who's the quarterback is my question. Who is making sure that everybody's running their routes, blocking who they're supposed to block, and tackling who they should tackle?
So there are head coaches, there are defensive coordinators, and there are offensive coordinators.
Who's the head
in this
coach?
Analogy. So the president's the head coach. We have offensive and defensive coordinators across the bat. But when you talk about this law enforcement coordination piece and the investigatory piece, we have improved relationships with the FBI on sharing information, deconfliction of actual on-network sorts of activities where I'm trying to get in there and help the victim recover their networks while the FBI is trying to figure out who's doing this, who the bad guy is, whether it's Russia or whomever. And there's a process. Now, I'll say that the process needs to improve. The FBI has a long history of processes and procedures, and they've been at this game a bit longer than my team has. We are still evolving. I still see CISA, an agency, as a bit of a startup. And so we are still working internally to build the processes that we need so that we can work with the Defense Department, we can work with the FBI, we can work with the intelligence community to ensure that we're doing the things that we need to do to ensure the victims are protected.
Is there one person who wakes up every day to make sure that you all are coordinated and that's their sole responsibility? So who would be the offensive and defensive coordinator? But I'm talking about somebody whose own responsibility. Look, the president has a whole bunch of things that he has to work on. But is there someone in the White House or anywhere else that wakes up to make sure that you all are coordinated with the FBI, is coordinated with the CIA, and that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do?
There is an entire directorate within the National Security Council that's focused on cybersecurity. There's a directorate focused on resilience. So there are a number of officials at the White House and the Executive Office of the President and the NSC that support our efforts. Again, from a policy perspective, we are the operational agencies. I have all the authorities I need to go do my job. And so when I wake up every day, I'm figuring out how to make sure state and local election officials are getting the support they need, just like the FBI, when they go out and they do their job, and the intelligence community, they do their job.
The FY 2020 budget request, if enacted, would cut CISA's budget below the 2019 funding levels. How would you manage those cuts, and how would you spread them across CISA?
So I think the budget, you have to think through the budget formulation process. So the FY20 budget process was started in about 18 months or so ago, actually before I was really in a leadership position at the agency. And it is truly what I would call, and this is an NPPD budget, so it's a legacy budget. What we're doing right now is we're standing up CISA, we are trying to figure out what we want to be when we grow up. So 2 years from now, where do we want to be positioned? There are a number of unmet requirements, I think, that we're discovering. I think today's release of the National Critical Functions alone is representative of the potentiality of this agency. So we identified 55 functions. This is an evolution of the risk management thinking beyond 16 sectors. This is 55 functions that really truly impact national security, economic security, public health and safety. So I can address at current a number of these functions. I think election security is a great example. Congress has invested in my agency to date close to $60 million purely focused on election security. I don't think I have, outside of federal networks, I don't think I have another critical infrastructure sector that Congress has invested specifically to that level. If you factor in the 22.3 in the FY20 request, that's over $80 million on a national critical function.
I'm a minute over, so I'll just ask you a very simple question. If we doubled your budget, would you spend it all?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you. With that, I'll yield to the ranking member, Mr. Katko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Just a quick question. Well, not a quick question. This is more of a detailed question, actually. In Albany, New York, not far from my district, there was a recent ransomware attack that could have affected the police department's the patrol vehicles. And I'm horrified to think what could have been done if they got into those systems. How does CISA perform outreach to state and local governments like these? And can that outreach be improved with proper funding?
I think we have a lot of room to grow in state and local engagement. It's interesting that you mentioned Albany, New York, because actually one of our key partners in engaging with state and local officials, election or otherwise, is based in Albany. It's the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. We fund the MSISAC on an annual basis, and you've heard me talk about our Albert sensors before, our network, net flow and intrusion detection systems. They manage that process for us. So, what more can I do? This is not something that gets fixed overnight. Working with state and local officials, again, election or not, the progress has to first be made on the relationship building and the trust side. I have a lot of tools that if I was given more resources, I could scale those tools, but the thing I can't buy overnight, I can't go build with an engineer, is the relationship and the trust between these officials. So it's going to take time, it's going to take people, and it's going to take relationship development. But with the appropriate resources, I can get all those things done in due time.
And to follow up on another area, what percentage of the Homeland Security grants, to your knowledge, go towards cybersecurity?
I'd have to get back to you on the specifics of the budget, or of the grant budget, but I'll say this, that last year was the first year that in the Homeland Security Grant Program that there was two important elements: a requirement for an investment justification for cyber expenditures, as well as the requirement to include a CIO or CISO on the decision board at the state level. That has been carried through to this year, but it is out of the same big pot of money that we have a number of other requirements set against, and we have historically had those requirements set against.
Now, last week I had the pleasure to spend quite a bit of time at Syracuse University in their quantum computing research area. To say that my head hurt when I got done is an understatement. But there's some very smart people, but quantum computing is a real threat, and it's a very real threat in the cyber area as far as our cyber defenses. So as CISA is thinking about securing tomorrow, how are you preparing for the potential effects of quantum and other emerging technologies on critical infrastructure?
So as I think of emerging technologies, whether it's quantum or artificial intelligence, machine learning, some of those things are here in certain respects. I have to look at both sides of the opportunity as well as the potential risk. 5G is actually a fantastic example of this right now. So one of the things that I am doing is using this that I plan to do is we'll use this national critical functions set, 55 functions, to work with stakeholders to understand what the potential impacts on them may be. Ultimately, critical infrastructure in the U.S., I don't have the primary source here, 85% owned and operated by the private sector. We've heard that number time and time again. So when I want to understand where the risk is, where I want to understand what the potential impacts are, I go to the source. I go to the people that own the networks and get a sense of what their concerns are. And I am able to then bring the intelligence community, the law enforcement community. I really do sit in an interesting spot in government and industry, that intersection of the IC, law enforcement, and the private sector. And within those government conversations, I am the advocate for the private sector.
So just so we're clear, could you explain to the committee just at an elementary level, because not everyone understands the threat that quantum computing is, but basically it's fair to say if the bad guys get the quantum computing capabilities before we do on a large scale, that our networks are going to be much more vulnerable. Is that fair to say?
I think particularly from an encryption, post-quantum computing presents a number of risks to our current security configurations, encryption, password management, things of that nature. So it is something that the federal government is investing in quite significantly right now.
And lastly, I'll be quicker with the 55 national critical functions you issued today. You spoke about them for a moment, but why don't you expand on them just briefly? How do you envision this as different from our critical infrastructure sectors and lifeline sectors? And how can we ensure that this does not leave anyone behind?
So the way I think about this is as we're increasingly connecting, as we're more interdependent, this framework, it really is a framework more than anything, allows us to think about those things that are more important. It's not about specific organizations, businesses, banks, energy companies, whatever. It's about the thing they do and the thing they deliver and who is involved in delivering that service. So it actually allows us to expand and open up the aperture so that we're not leaving people behind. I think in the current formulation, it's possible that we're not hitting all the right bits and pieces of the supply chain, for instance, small and medium-sized businesses. This gives us a better appreciation of some of those niche or boutique companies that may deliver a really critical service that doesn't fall neatly within the 16 sectors.
Well, thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Benny Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Acting under Secretary Bryan, I'll try to be a little specific on my questions. For instance, in the budget that's proposed, the Coastal Resilience Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is scheduled for elimination. Do you support that?
Mr. Chairman, I support the President's budget. Having said that, I certainly appreciate the resources Congress has provided over the years and the support to the S&T folks and the mission that we have. All of our centers of excellence provide great value. In fact, that particular center of excellence has handled about 137 technical requests and has received additional resources from outside of S&T for the work that they're doing. But under the proposed budget, we're going to have to look at some centers of excellence, 2 of them, frankly, that would have to be shut down and halt the startup of 3 other ones should the President's budget be executed.
So that a yes or no?
I'm saying, Chairman, all the centers of excellence provide value. Tough decisions have to be made when you have to reduce your budget. Fortunately, over the past few years, we've not had to execute on some of those tough discussions that we've had to have with the budget that we've been given. But again, we have to look at the priorities of the department and look at some of the other missionaries or the other centers of excellence in making those decisions.
Well, I would assume that's maybe. They do a lot with coastal resilience, and we've lost immeasurable coastal properties. The chairman's area, Louisiana, is a good example of the losses. So I'd like to have the benefit, if not at this hearing, as to how we plan to replace that capacity, because it appears to be something that's vital to everything. Coupled with that, you talked about 35 small companies you've been giving contracts to as it relates to small business opportunities and what have you. Do you have the data on how many are women-owned or minority-owned or anything like that?
Mr. Chairman, we can get back with you on the specifics of that. We do have some programs focusing on historically black colleges and universities as well as minority-serving institutions. And if you don't mind, I can share some of those activities.
Well, I would love to have it.
Certainly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Krebs, the supply chain problem that we've identified a good bit. Have you looked at how we can better manage supply chain so it does not continue to be a vulnerability?
We have a number of efforts ongoing right now. Last year, we established an ICT Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. I mentioned in my opening, the 20 members of the federal government, 20 members of the IT, and 20 members of the comms. Basically, what we're trying to do through this task force is to bring together a diverse group of players who all play in the supply chain risk management space somewhere at some point, and create more of a consistent lexicon or understanding of how to share threat information. I get information, Kaspersky Labs, for instance. How can I share that out in a protected manner to people that can take action and remove the threat?
Thank you. Election security.
Yes, sir.
Now that everybody agree that the Russians are a problem and that we need to do something about it, some of us are thinking about 2020 and what can we do between now and then to protect our system of elections. What's your suggestions to members of Congress as to what we can do?
Sir, I think about protecting 2020 every day. In fact, a month or so ago, out at the RSA conference in San Francisco, I gave a keynote, and I actually had bumper stickers made up that said, #Protect 2020. We're all in on protecting the 2020 election. Where I think we are going to get the most amount of progress over the next year and a half, one is continuing to extend our engagement with state and local election officials. We had about 1,400 of them prior to 2018, but there are 8,800 total, so I've got to keep pushing out. We are also going to help understand where the risk truly is in the system. What are the things that are not just vulnerable, but most susceptible, where the highest consequences are. And then once we get down, which I think we're pretty close, we need to figure out what resources are going to be required to close out those vulnerabilities. Whether you like it, or whether anybody likes it or not, there's a technology deficit in state and local governments in general, but it's specifically in the election community. So what are the resources, whether they come from the federal government or from state and local legislatures? That's a conversation we need to have. We need to get resources to these people so that they can protect their systems.
So what you're saying is that technology deficit, unless it's fixed, potentially serves as a danger to the conduct of our 2020 elections.
Sir, I think just like any other IT problem, which in some cases the election security issue is just an IT security issue, there are 15-plus-year-old machines or equipment out there that may not be managed anymore. There may not be updates available. They may be out of cycle. So how do we get those systems, those known antiquated, vulnerable systems, out of the system and put the more secure stuff in, and at the same time build auditability into the process and really hammer the importance of auditability across the election process?
So in other words, somebody needs to provide some resources for that to occur.
Sir, it's got to come from somewhere. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman now recognizes Mr. Walker from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to ask the overall committee chairman for a copy of that report on the HBCU outreach by the undersecretary. When you get a copy of that, I would appreciate that. Director Krebs, how does your agency interact with the Science and Technology Directorate? Can you mention a bit of the relationship?
So, soap dust, Brian? Is that what I'm supposed to call you? That's my old title. The senior official performing the duties here. I actually have an embed, so I have a couple folks from his shop that work with my folks on a regular basis. I define a set of requirements that I need support on from an R&D perspective, share that with Mr. Bryan, and then he is able to align his research and development programs against my requirements. It was a top priority for both of us as we came in to ensure that we were pulling the same direction and that we weren't, often competing research and development priorities.
Sure. Yeah. Why do you consider that, to use your words, top priority? a top priority?
Right now, I'm looking at mobile security, 5G security, for instance. There's a great deal of opportunity in front of both of us in terms of understanding what the risks are and how we can deploy more secure mobile technology. Also looking at general data analytics. I have an incredible amount of data that I am able to collect off of federal agencies, but I don't have the tools or the horsepower and the pipes to do the right kind of work across it and analyze the true threat. So helping, he's helping me pull together what the tools and the infrastructure would look like.
Nice transition to the Undersecretary. Same question for you. How would you describe your relationship or the interaction with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and why is that alliance important to advancing overall DHS positions?
One of the priorities when I took over this position was to increase the relationship, we are a customer service organization. So we have to create an environment where the components and the customers and first responders have to want to work with S&T because of the value added that we bring to them. And that was not always the case across the board with the relationship between S&T and some of the components. The relationship between the former NPPD and the former leadership within S&T was not all that good. So there was not a lot of leveraging of capability. So Director Krebs and myself both determined that we were going to fix that. And we structured and built our organizations in such a way so that I actually have a team dedicated to servicing CISA. I have teams dedicated to servicing every component within the Department of Homeland Security. So we're no longer in a position where he asks us for or gives us a requirement, and we take that and sit on it for a year, take another year to figure out how we're going to solve it. We actually have people, as he mentioned, embedded, and so when a requirement comes in, we can tackle it right away.
Sure. A little bit of concern on the duplicative efforts between the two. Can you address that? And with the transfer of funds from the S&T to the CISA, will that help eliminate some of the duplicity?
So we've worked hard over the last year and a half plus to remove any redundancy or duplication of efforts. It doesn't matter where the money ends up. The job is going to get done. The job is going to get coordinated across the two of us. If I end up with the money, I will be working with Bill and his team to transfer and execute the funds in the research program accordingly.
Any concern from either one of you that this could create challenges fulfilling the DHS's cybersecurity missions as a whole?
Bill, I don't have any.
I have no concerns.
I think this is a matter of leadership. I think we both weigh into it.
Let me switch topics here when I've got a little bit, about 80 seconds left. Although many areas within S&T's budget requests had funding reductions or transfers, one key thrust area that was increased was the RD&I, or the Research Development Innovation Funding for Border Security. Do you think this is a result of DHS's commitment to finding a solution to the crisis at the border? Mr. Bryan.
Yes, I do. Not just the crisis at the southern border, but also the influx of opioids. So a lot of that increase had to do with helping to figure out how to find those opioids as they come in through the mail system and other places as well.
Sure. As the ranking member, privileged to serve on the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Subcommittee, I would like to hear your perspective on how the RD&I funding is helping to develop innovative technologies, products, or other solutions to protect overall our nation.
Well, a key element of our innovation, frankly, was within our Silicon Valley Innovative Program. That was a big benefit for us because we were able to tap into innovators, entrepreneurs, small companies, citizen scientists to help us with some of our most pending critical situations. Now, we've lost that authority, that OTA authority, which we're trying to get back. But the Silicon Valley Innovative Program is just one of many ways we were able to tap into that innovation quickly.
Okay, 10 seconds left. This last question. How has the CISA's work aligned with the 2018 DHS cybersecurity strategy? What remains to be done? If you just hit the second part of that question, strategy.
So we have to continue rolling out into the critical infrastructure community. The federal network space is pretty straightforward. It's the critical infrastructure community. I need to be able to get my tools. One thing I don't do, I need to be better at is marketing and engagement. So we're going to put a lot of effort there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome our witnesses here today and thank you for your testimony. Thank you for the job that you're doing. Before I get into my questions, I just want to touch on Chairman Richmond's question early on. We talked about who's in charge, who's coordinating. The reality is that we still don't have someone in charge, and I understand the analogy with the president, but since we're talking sports analogies, that'd be equivalent to maybe the team owner, but who is actually executing, and you don't have a Bill Belichick. That person was basically fired by the cybersecurity coordinator, and so nobody really has the policy and budgetary authority to really reach across government that's pulling this together. So that's something that we still need to focus on. I still say that we need a Senate-confirmed director with policy and budgetary authority to do that, but we'll leave that for another time. Director Krebs, I appreciate the work that you and your team are doing at CISA, but as you know, I also sit on the House Armed Services Committee, and from that perspective, I'm fully vested in ensuring that CISA has the capacity, wherever possible, to complete its core mission without drawing on Pentagon resources. And so developing that expertise is essential for DHS, again, not having to always rely on reach back to Cyber Command or NSA for expertise. Based on my experience, a lot of that capacity building still really relies on DHS workforce. So to that end, does the budget request reflect internal efforts to train and importantly retain the DHS cybersecurity workforce?
I think the budget, thank you for the question, and I would probably pick, if you asked me, a different NFL head coach other than Belichick, not a Patriots fan. Look,
we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. I think he's doing pretty good.
When we look at the budget, particularly from a personnel perspective, we are still growing as an agency. We are still filling billets. I think I've got about 1,300 folks. Let's see, I've got 1,100 cybersecurity professionals in place with about 361 vacant positions right now. About 40% of those we have either a pending decision or a hiring action against. So our vacancy rate is not huge, but it's still, we need to be filling those spots. We have cross-training mechanisms in place. We are working to cross-train across not just CISA and not just DHS, but through part of the President's management agenda, we will be pushing out a cybersecurity workforce academy across the entirety of the interagency. But at the same time, we're looking down the road of what does our incoming pipeline look like? Partnering with the Scholarship for Service program to bring in college graduates and graduate programs, working with organizations like the recently announced Cyber Talent Initiative for MasterCard, Microsoft, Workday just launched. We need to be innovative in thinking about the ways that we can bring folks in, retain them. But if we lose them to industry, it's not the worst thing in the world, because if they're with me for 5, 6, 7, 8 years and then go out to industry, that means I'm building an alumni network that I haven't previously had, particularly along the lines of the FBI and the service academies. So we are looking at all different angles in terms of building that capacity.
All right, it's essential. I mean, even U.S. Cybercom says that attracting and retaining the best talent is a challenge. And so, to follow up on this, do you believe that CISA is an attractive place for technical and operational cybersecurity experts, and how does the budget support efforts to make it more attractive?
Flat out, yes. I think it's one of the best places to work in the federal government. I mean, you get to go work with the critical infrastructure community. You get to work with the federal agencies and hunt for Russian, Chinese, North Korean, Iranian actors on a daily basis. That's
so
just
let
plain fun.
me ask you this before my time runs out. You pledged again to work with any jurisdiction that needs cybersecurity help on their elections. But do you actually now have the personnel to do that, as well as to meet your other demands of priority customers?
I think at the moment we are finding that the request for our support is escalating, particularly from the state and local community. I think elections have shown us that there is a huge unmet need out there. And so as I look to the out years, we are going to need to boost our capabilities, absolutely.
I hope you're going to be asking for the right resources to do that, and we stand ready to support you. So I know my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
You're welcome. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Taylor, is recognized for 5 minutes.
You sure? All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Just going back to a conversation we had before we started this hearing, in terms of municipal subdivisions of, so cities, utility districts, a lot of those government entities have personal data, right? So they've got addresses, names, social security numbers, credit card information. What are the penalties in federal law for a data breach for those organizations?
So, not necessarily an expert in specific jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but there are certain cases where there are very narrowly tailored regulatory programs in place that speak to data breach issues. But generally speaking, it's state by state of what the requirements are to notify the public, to notify any potential victims.
What actions are we taking at the federal level to try to help cities, counties, special purpose districts, subdivisions underneath the states to secure their data, to deal with cyber attacks?
Every service pretty much that I can provide to the federal government, I try to ship that out to state and local governments. Little known fact, but the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, which is basically an economies of scale where we buy a bunch of services and products for the federal agency, that list is available to state and local governments. So what I need to do is I have really good technical capabilities. I have really good tools and services. What I need to do a better job of is building awareness across state and local governments of what those things are, how they can use them. Quick example, last year was a really bad year for state and local governments between Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, Baltimore, Atlanta, Colorado Department of Transportation, all got popped for ransomware. We took that, saw the trend lines, and executed a ransomware awareness campaign, webinars, local engagement. My field force was engaging on a local basis. We saw an uptick in services, but we've got to keep hitting it harder. We've got to keep hitting it harder. A lot of these jurisdictions don't have the resources or the wherewithal to protect themselves.
Shifting over to the National Risk Management Center, which has only been online for 10 months, can you speak to what's happened there, and then kind of where we've come in 10 months, and where do you sort of see the future?
Yes, sir. So the concept behind the National Risk Management Center was to take an existing organization or subcomponent within my organization that was more of an internal research or risk analysis feature that took a task from internal, my leadership team and some other stakeholders. And our concept was to flip it around and turn it into a storefront for industry to come in and set our risk and analytics, strategic risk analytics agenda. So in the meantime, things we've done, first and foremost, today's National Critical Functions effort. That was spearheaded by the National Risk Management Center. Again, an evolution of risk management thinking. The ICT Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force, managed by the National Risk Management Center. Never been done before at this scale across the interagency and with industry. The election security efforts run out of the National Risk Management Center. But fundamentally, this is about identifying, understanding strategic risk, and driving initiatives to manage that risk today and in the future.
And then you mentioned this briefly in your opening remarks about the domain name system, or DNS. And then can you just speak to what do we need to do there, and sort of what's the problem and what's the future solution?
So DNS is, right, it's the internet phone book on how you end up on that URL or that website that you're looking for. What we found in early January during the shutdown was that somebody out there had figured out a way, not particularly sophisticated, but just a concerted effort at global scale, of how to tamper with, or hijack's not the right word, but tamper with that process and compromise accounts. And so what we did first and foremost was figure out what was happening across the federal interagency and locked it down and had a better awareness, and that's what we accomplished through the emergency directive. Going forward, what we think we can do is centralize some of those DNS records management processes across the federal government, because again, I have 99 agencies to work with. What we want to do is provide as much centralization of services as possible so we can lock that process down. In addition, the way a lot of malware works from its command and control infrastructure is it beacons back and forth to the mothership using DNS lookups. And so if we can sit on top of that process, we'll have a better understanding of what's going on across the federal interagency.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Congresswoman Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Krebs, I think you were talking before. I don't know if I heard this correctly, but would you describe it as a resistance with state and local governments to working together with you on election security, or is that not the right
If
word?
you had asked me 2 years ago, I may have said yes. Look, I like thinking through this process from where we were, where we are now, and where we need to go. In 2016, when this all went down, we were not really, as a government, state and local or federal, really aware of the potential risks to the election process. And so when the federal government engaged, and it's something that is historically and by statute, legislative tradition, a responsibility of state and local governments, there was an immediate recoil. There was an immediate antibodies that said, we've got this, we don't need your help. But from the intelligence community perspective, from DHS, we understood the risks, I think. But when you don't have trust and you're trying to work in this space, it's an uphill climb. But in the intervening 2 years, particularly the run up to 2018, just the commitment, the engagement, the providing resources, and the communication that we're not trying to take elections over.
Right.
We don't want to regulate elections. We are here to help. The ship's turned entirely, 180 degrees from where we were. We work with all 50 states. We have sensors, those Albert sensors, we just shipped the 50th. So that means every state's state Secretary of State at the highest level is going to be working with us on the intrusion detection system. I'm really optimistic about where we're going, but the technology deficit remains. There's work to be done. We've got to figure out how to improve and modernize and upgrade these systems. But a lot of it is also a people problem, so we've got to continue to educate, continue to share that phishing remains one of the biggest threat vectors that the bad guys are using, particularly the Russians.
So in 2016, most of the Russian efforts were targeted at the party committees, whether it was the DNC or the DCCC, and individual campaigns of elected officials. When you testified before the full committee in February, you stated that you didn't see a problem with using the information sharing, ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center model, to develop a more formal information sharing arrangement between DHS and the political party committees. And for that matter, individual elections. I mean, we are all up here in a constant election mode. And I can tell you, I'm sure I don't know the best ways to keep the political side. And you know, this is not talking about politics here, but the fact is that those are where the attacks are happening. So have you been able to set up an arrangement with these political, whether it's the Republican side or the Democratic side, these party committees?
So we prior to the 2018 midterm, we did work with all the national level committees and some state level committees. That is going to continue to be a priority for us, the committee level as well as the specific campaigns. We will provide services. We will continue to do those things that we offer for states, whether it's vulnerability scanning, information sharing mechanisms. We're going to offer those up. But I'd ask, each of you are in cycle right now. Do you know if your campaign is working with us? You know, that's a good question to ask. In the meantime, the DNC, Bob Lord, the CIO over there, I think has done a really good job of talking about the basics of security, cyber hygiene, you know, using a commercial grade email, using encrypted messaging apps, multi-factor authentication, really basics. If you do the basics, if your campaigns do the basics, I'm not talking go buy some super sophisticated security widget. If you do the basics, you can address 90-some-odd% of the threat.
Right. I agree with you. Mr. Bryan, the President's budget again proposes closing the National Urban Security Technology Laboratory, New Steel, in Manhattan, New York. New Steel supports the successful development, evaluation, and transition of Homeland Security technologies into field use for first responders. I've also reintroduced legislation to permanently authorize the lab, which passed the House unanimously in the last Congress. Many police commissioners and fire chiefs have expressed great concern over the President's desire to close New Steel and hamper efforts to prevent and respond to terrorist attacks. Every first responder agency in the New York metropolitan area utilizes New Steel technologies, including the NYPD, the FDNY, and certainly in my district, the Nassau County Police Department on Long Island. How does closing the only lab entirely focused on preparing and protecting first responders against threats of terrorism make any sense?
Again, ma'am, I can't say enough positive things about New Steel myself. It is a capability and an asset with the relationships that they've formed in New York to be able to do the kind of work that they're doing, and you're articulated all that very well. My role right now and what I have to do is look at should we have to lose that capability, what would we do with the work that's
But
going on
don't you, do
there?
you have the power, do you feel like you have the power to voice your concern about maybe cutting in a different area other than this? That's my question. I mean, I understand the loyalty, I understand that the orders come from the top down, but if you have a very deep, real concern, which it sounds like you do, about getting rid of this new steel, I don't, you know, what are the remedies? There has to be a remedy.
Yeah, the only remedy I have, and all I can do is look to where those capabilities could be performed elsewhere.
Well, clearly,
at
they are unique to this infrastructure.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we just have to continue that conversation. I think more people in positions like yours and Mr. Krebs hopefully are, you know, stand up and push back when things like this want to be done by the administration. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Now, the other gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. For those that have been on this subcommittee for a while, they know that it has been an effort over multiple years on this committee to elevate DHS's cybersecurity mission through CISA. So I was especially pleased that the President's budget request included increased funding for what is our nation's lead civilian cybersecurity agency. I think that shows that this administration is serious about prioritizing our defenses against new and emerging cybersecurity challenges. And I have a lot of confidence that that will hopefully continue, because it has to continue. It's obvious to both of you that cybersecurity now touches literally every aspect of the world we live in. It's central to every sector of our economy. It's vitally important for protecting the most sensitive information of every American, and that makes it one of our foremost national security challenges. And in my time on the committee, I've tried to press the department to continue to improve its work in providing the private sector with actionable real-time cyber threat intelligence, to improve as a forum for cross-sector cybersecurity work, and now to continue its good work on the continuous diagnostic and mitigation program, a program that I believe is vitally important to our cybersecurity posture. So to that point, Director Krebs, I want to ask you, the administration's budget request includes an increase for CDM to continue providing those necessary tools and services for all phases of the program that enable our federal IT networks to strengthen our security posture of those cyber networks. I would like you to, if you can, expand on the reasons behind the increase in funding for CDM.
So CDM, thank you, sir. Your long-term support of CISA it's been a huge part of our success in getting us into an agency from NPPD. In terms of CDM, CDM is certainly one of those kind of arrows in the quiver as we protect the federal network. CDM is one of the reasons, one of the capabilities of why we've improved so dramatically since the OPM breach. In particular, the understanding and the ability to look across those 99 agencies and understand what, for instance, operating systems are running within their environment, and help work with those agencies to get them on a roadmap or a path to a more secure configuration. When I talk about the binding operational directive for patch management and vulnerability management, we are able to see what is going on in those agencies in terms of those critical vulnerabilities or those high vulnerabilities. So we can actually measure now. We have the visibility so we can see and we can take action. CDM will continue to be, for us long term, whether it's understanding what's on the network, who is interacting on the network, and ultimately getting down to the data protection level. It will be a core element, one of the crown jewels of federal network security for us.
So to that point then, is the funding level that's included, is it sufficient to advance the procurement and the installation of CDM's capabilities all the way through phase 4?
Well, when you think about the life cycle of the program of CDM, and it's important to keep in mind that every agency, the 99 agencies, every agency has a different level of maturity. So some agencies may be ready to go to phase 4 well before other agencies. So two elements of that. One, we have to continue investing in agencies and getting them up to speed and getting their systems modernized, but also it allows for a policy conversation on what do we want the future of federal networks to look like. My view is that having 99 different agencies to manage independently is long-term an untenable position. I think there is a model that the Department of Defense has in the DODN where they have broader span of control over the elements of the Department of Defense. And when we think about these 99 agencies, what I want to be able to do is provide more centralized services. So take some of the risk out of the hands of the departments and agencies. Earlier this week, we were named the Qualified Service Management offering for security services, which puts us in a shared service model out to those other federal agencies. But really getting to a point where CIOs and CISOs or CIOs are thinking more about citizen services rather than securing their infrastructure. Let my team help manage that process.
Director, my time has expired, but just to follow up on that, because you and I have talked about this a lot, we need to get better at breaking down the initial barriers to provide agencies with real-time situational awareness and risk-based accountable information, all of which are vitally important and imperative to our federal cybersecurity efforts. Bottom line, does this funding level, will it do that? Will it expand the CDM program to more agencies and in the end allow CISA to better protect and manage those high-value assets?
So certainly, with more I can do more. With more people, I can work with CIOs of agencies to help them develop their plans. I can help push out a security baseline for secure configuration across the agencies. So certainly, I can do more, and I can do more faster.
I appreciate the chair's indulgence. I yield back.
You're welcome. The gentlelady from Texas, Mrs. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the chair and the ranking member for this hearing. It couldn't be more important. Just going to briefly start with you, Mr. Bryan. As you well know, I spoke to you a couple of months ago with a major university who had a concern, and I've not yet heard, and it is an important issue for them. They worked very hard, and I'm just wondering when you will reach my office with a response.
Yes, ma'am. If I'm not mistaken, a formal response was drafted, and I will follow up on where that went. But in the short order, I can tell you that the discussion based on 2 projects that they're considering at the university. One of them has already been approved, and we are adjudicating the other one as we speak, so it should not take much longer before a final decision is made.
So maybe we'll reach each other. It did not lapse, which was their concern, that they did not get out of the queue.
That is correct.
And so they are in the queue.
Yes.
Let me thank you very much. Let me just pursue, Mr. Krebs, this whole idea of the budget, and I do appreciate at least the suggested budget of the president. How many staff are in your sector?
So across the agency, we're at about 2,200 personnel, federal full-time equivalent.
This is dealing with cybersecurity issues?
Cybersecurity, I'm at about close to 1,200 in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I'm just talking about cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity, yes, ma'am, about 1,200.
Okay. Let me read Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life, Robert Gregory Bowers, Mother Emanuel, Dylan Roof, Christchurch, Britton Harrison Tarrant, San Diego, John Aarons, and most recently, Los Angeles terrorist suspect arrested yesterday, Mark Stephen Domingo. I would say a good percentage of those use the cyber system to proffer their hate or to take from it their hate. And I think, Mr. Krebs, you've acknowledged the kinds of persons that are utilizing the cyber system. How many of those people do you have working on these kinds of hate efforts, dastardly acts that result in the murder of Americans and sometimes the murder of people around the world?
So on the physical side of this, Tree of Life's a great example. One of my protective security advisors up in Pittsburgh had worked with the Tree of Life Synagogue, had done a security assessment, a walkthrough of the facility, and identified areas for perhaps improved egress. And in fact, the rabbi at the Tree of Life Synagogue had credited my team for saving lives
I'm
during.
particularly talking about the use of the cyber system to promote hate.
Yes, ma'am.
What are we dealing with?
So this is a domestic terrorism issue in part. Recently, the office, and I'd have to get back with you on the structure and the engagement, but an Office of Terrorism Prevention. This was just last week or 2 weeks ago out of the Office of Policy that's focused on, much like countering ISIS, how do we address issues like this of online speech? Fundamentally, when I look at the problem, there are First Amendment challenges with this challenge right now, or with this issue right now. But my team is focused. When you say cyber systems, really what you're talking about is social media, email, other forms of IT and communications. There is does not fall within the traditional cybersecurity definition, and it does not fall within my traditional cybersecurity authorities.
Well, let me move on because I think it should. Let me ask unanimous consent to place in the record that Computer Week, while connected devices are transforming our personal and working lives in a multitude of ways, there are also a growing security risk. Attackers are hijacking these devices and turning them into Internet of Things botnets. So I ask unanimous consent to place that in the record.
Without objection.
Let me ask a question again, Mr. Krebs, on maybe something that is within your jurisdiction. What is being done to incentivize election officials to report suspected malicious cyber activity, and how arduous are the reporting process? What do we learn from the tabletop vote exercise? If you can hold that question. And then the second one is, on the issue of botnets, which are networks of private computers infected with malicious software and controlled as a group without the owner's knowledge, i.e. to send spam messages or launch attacks against networks or computing services. One of the new exploits involve using voice over IP, the internet, to launch an attack that targets a phone number for calls that are auto-dialed or redirected for the purpose of preventing legitimate telecommunications from occurring. We know what the Russians did in 2016. Is your office considering this type of threat to public elections posed by botnets? You would answer those two
Yes, ma'am. So in terms of general incentives to election officials, steady engagement, regular engagement, providing them an understanding of the things we can do to help them out. Our incentive is a support service. We provide them assistance. We help them manage the risk to their systems, build a relationship, build trust and confidence that I can help them. If they have a bad day, they'll come to me. I have confidence that we are building those relationships, and we will get there. In terms of specific botnet mitigation, two fronts on this. In the Executive Order 13800, there was a requirement to develop a botnet report. We worked on that with Commerce and TIA, set out a work plan with industry on countering botnets. So we are addressing this from two angles. One, working with industry to actually address the botnet challenge more holistically, but also we work with election officials to help them understand the threat posed by botnets and put counter botnet or DDoS mitigation capabilities in place to their system. So if they do experience some sort of DDoS tactic, which is effectively what we're talking about here, then they have those security mitigations in place.
And you said it was Executive Order 1300?
13800.
13800.
Yes, ma'am, May of 2017.
All right. Let me thank you very much, and I yield back.
I thank the gentle lady. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, the committee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the committee stands adjourned.